Hi everyone, this is Mr. Fokowski, and today we're going to be looking at the pathway to the Civil War. Think of us on a brick road, sort of similar to the Wizard of Oz, and on that brick path, there are going to be numerous issues that the United States is going to encounter that are just going to rapidly exacerbate the problems growing in the United States. And this isn't something that, happens over a span of 10 years or 20 years. It's really, since the start and foundation of the United States. You could even argue the fact that since the founding fathers never even dealt with the issue of slavery during the Constitutional Convention, that in its of itself was a cause of the Civil War, that perhaps if they had ironed that issue out, would the Civil War have happened? Now, certainly the opposite argument could be made that if they tried to put slavery in the Constitution, it would not have been ratified. So there are a number of different angles that we're going to look. But at this point, we have achieved manifest destiny under Polk. Polk will only serve one term. He will not run for re-election. And now we're going to look at the aftermath of manifest destiny. What have we gotten ourselves into? So, day one, Mexico will poison us. Those are the famous words of Emerson, and I think he's very clairvoyant in many ways, as it is the acquisition of the Mexican territory that really leads us down this path toward the Civil War even further. So the first thing that's going to come about is something known as the Wilmot Proviso. Basically, this was a proposed amendment that failed twice, but it would ban slavery in these new territories. Now, Whigs and Democrats, which are the two major political parties at this point, are very much split. You definitely have the northern Whigs and Democrats who are very much against slavery, while the South, which heavily depends on slavery, those people are more, of course, for slavery. So really, how should this issue of slavery be solved? Well, we have one man named Lewis Cass who was nominated by the Democrats. He was a veteran from the War of 1812. He was dubbed General Gas, and then sooner or later, Whigs will call him Jackass because his name rhymes with Cass, so that's sort of his nickname. And why he's really important, even though he doesn't win the election of 1848, is he crafts this idea known as popular sovereignty. And what popular sovereignty maintains is that people should ultimately decide whether or not slavery should exist in these new territories. So basically, it's a referendum. So, for example, people go to the polls and either vote yes, slavery should be extended, or no, slavery should not be extended. And this was a great idea in some ways because this is very much aligned with the principle of self-determination, one of the founding principles of the United States. And this definitely provides people with the option. It tosses this issue of slavery into the laps of the people. It's not just politicians deciding it. Now it's people literally voting yes or no. So we'll get down to how this impacts the course of the United States toward the Civil War. But for now, just be familiar that Lewis Cass is the father of popular sovereignty. On the Whigs side, they are meeting in Philadelphia, and they will nominate Zachary Taylor. If you recall, he was the hero from Buena Vista. So despite being vastly outnumbered by troops, he's still able to capture Buena Vista, helping to propel the United States against Mexico. But even though that Taylor was just a very prestigious general, he never did hold any type of office, and supposedly he never even voted for a president before. Nonetheless, sort of the leading person in the Whig Party at this point was Clay, but he was too controversial, made too many enemies, so he really won't be nominated. And both Whigs and Democrats sort of sidestepped this issue of slavery. They sort of just avoided it altogether because it was too controversial. They don't want to alienate potential voters. Now, they might say, okay, great, we'll have an election of the 1848 and we won't even mention slavery. However, there's a third party known as the Free Soil Party. And the Free Soil Party was both distrustful of both Whigs as well as Democrats, and they come out against slavery 100%. I mean, there's no bones about it. They make it very overt and obvious that they hate slavery. And they also will try to attract other people and voters from around the United States as well. So they'll advocate for internal improvements. They even urge for federal government homesteads for settlers. And sort of the campaign slogan for Free Soilers were free soil, free speech, free labor, and free men. And from this motto, it very much attracts a diverse group of people. You have some people who just hated Polk for not capturing all of Oregon. So remember his concession or deal with the British. You have others who hate blacks and don't want to share land with African Americans. And then you have those who just hate slavery altogether. In fact, it should be pointed out that many people have this idea that if you were an abolitionist and you wanted slavery to be abolished, it was just because of moral grounds that slavery was just this evil institution. But for others, it was economic. Some hated slavery because it hurt people's wages, white people's wages, because if you're competing with free labor, or I shouldn't say free labor, but if you're competing with slaves, undoubtedly someone's going to acquire a slave before they have to pay you. So really, competition really is hurt by slavery. So, I mean, if you're a southern plantation owner, who are you going to use? A slave or a white person who you're going to have to pay? So from the white man's perspective, we should get rid of slavery. It's hurting us because we can't get a job, or if we do get a job, we're competing with these slaves and we're going to make basically next to nothing. So Free Soilers have a wide range of views, and interestingly enough, they nominate Van Buren to run on the Free Soil Party ticket. And if you remember, Van Buren did lose quite heavily against Harrison. Remember how that whole whiskey versus champagne hard cider issue came about. That doesn't come about again, but it's just another little tidbit from what we've studied in the past. Ultimately, Zachary Taylor, a Whig, will win both the popular and the electoral votes because he's very popular. Because remember, he is the hero of Buena Vista, so that will ultimately propel him to win the election of 1848. Okay, moving on. So in California, we're going to have the infamous AU rush, also known as the Gold Rush. And after gold is discovered at Sutter's Mill, this spurs thousands of settlers from around the world. Most people think that it was only Americans who migrated west to California, hoping to strike it rich, hoping to say, Eureka, I found it. But in reality, it wasn't just Americans who migrated west. We have people from around the world, including China, Great Britain, and France. Again, hoping to strike it rich, but for most miners, they do not profit. They see very little return, as most of the gold was already, for lack of better words, I guess, mined. And really the ones who do make out well are not miners themselves. It's people who, operate general stores. And think about why that might be. There's no competition out in California. So if you are selling the only shovels, you basically have a monopoly. You can set the price at anything you want it to. And that's what happens. General store owners, the few that do exist in California, make a ton of money because they can gouge on all of the prices. In addition, prostitutes really do well out west. Not that I'm advocating for it, but they really do well. Because think about the demographics that are going to go out west. You're going to have young to middle-aged men. You're going to have not many women at all in California. So the few prostitutes that do go out there do make a good living. However, women who were not prostitutes living out there were subject, unfortunately, to sexual assault, and they weren't the only ones impacted. Native Americans were also impacted. For example, a lot of their land is taken away from them. So if they have less land to hunt on, they're going to have less game. And for some Native Americans, they do encounter starvation, unfortunately. You also have environmental issues, as you have toxins now polluting rivers. So really the gold rush did not benefit many and really impacted more negatively than it did positively. Even though we have this sort of iconic romantic image of the gold rush, and we even name the San Francisco 49ers after this period, it really was not a great period at all. To make matters even worse, there's a lot of crime, lawlessness that occurs. You have robberies, you have murder, we have prostitution, as I just stated before. And a lot of the law-abiding citizens who were in the majority are urged by Taylor to actually draft their own constitution, and that would even include excluding slavery, as well as applying to Congress for admission to the Union. So think about that again. They're drafting their own constitution that is going to bar slavery, and then they're going to then apply to Congress for admission. Well, think about the firestorm that this is going to bring, especially in the South, as it would be the straw that would break this delicate balance between the North and the South. So we have Free Soil California wanting admission to the Union. So the South is already up in arms, threatening secession, and they call for a convention in Tennessee, which brings together three infamous figures, Clay, Calhoun, and Webster. Let's begin with Clay. We've seen him before. He's the great compromiser, right? And he brings about the American system, which unites the North and the South politically and economically, and he's urging for compromise. Once again, he's saying to the North as well as to the South, both have to make concessions to keep this union intact. Calhoun, on the other hand, remember he's the great nullifier who Jackson threatened to hang, is advocating for the South 100%, saying that slavery should remain. Fugitive slaves who run away to the North should be returned. He's just advocating for all political rights to the South. And then we have Daniel Webster, who gives a very infamous speech, which is known as the 7th of March speech, which lasts for about 3 hours, pretty long. And he states, compromise, concession, and reasonableness are the only solution to keeping the Union intact. And his speech becomes very infamous, especially in the North, that it's mailed out to about 100,000 people. Now remember, though, even though Webster is technically more aligned with the Whigs sort of equate him to Benedict Arnold as a traitor because they see, well, he should have advocated more strongly for abolition. But really, in Webster's eyes, yeah, slavery was really terrible. But you know what's even worse? Is a disunited country. There were other views on this matter as well, one of them from William Seward, who was against compromise. Most people who were against compromise did come from the South, but there were a few in the North, one of which being William Seward. If you're familiar with Alaska, he was very much instrumental in its purchase. But Seward is advocating for abolition and against concession, and he states that there's a higher law, that Americans should be obeying God's law first and foremost, and this would include outlawing slavery. And President Taylor at this point also aligned himself with this idea, and Taylor even made it very well known that, any type of compromise together that didn't include abolition, he would veto. But interestingly enough, he inadvertently helps to bring about compromise by dying. This was a sudden illness, most likely, according to your history book and from historians, of acute intestinal disorder. So this will allow President Fillmore, his VP, to become president. And Fillmore did believe in compromise, and this is something that's going to come about in the form of the Compromise of 1850, which we'll be looking at in day 2. This is advocated by Douglas, Clay, Webster in the North, but at this point, the South is still very much against it. And Clay, at this point in the North, despite all of his ailing health problems, he gives over 70 speeches, very much an ardent supporter of compromise. Eventually, the South is going to reluctantly accept the Compromise of 1850. It's only because of those Southern Unionists who want to keep the Union still intact. So the Union at this point is once again kept together, but just barely. I mean, it's very, very fragile, and it's not going to be very much longer until the outbreak of the Civil War.